thank you very much to James and George back in the studio. For those of you watching, you will notice our backgrounds are a little bit different, but hopefully, fingers crossed, if you're listening, this is all exactly the same as we do Pulp Kitchen remotely. George, last night we had a very fun time at the Gladiator 2 premiere in what I think is now probably the biggest event marketing splash for a film since we've started doing this. The only one I think rivals it is The Crown Season 5. Would you think that's correct?
Yes, I do. I think this is the biggest one. It was a rooftop soiree overlooking Leicester Square, followed by a very, very extensive red carpet. And they had, as I thought they would do, booked out 2 cinemas and the screens of all the cinemas within that. So the Odeon Leicester Square was completely booked out. Obviously, that's a huge, probably like 750 screen seat cinema. And then the Cineworld has 3 screens there, the 4DX, the IMAX, and the Super Screen. And those were all booked out as well. It was a massive event. And of course, it was a royal premiere. So good King Charles did turn up at the very end.
And we had very good seats, George, like slightly further back, but smack bang in the middle. You know, there's no excuses for angles here, no sort of Dutch angles watching the film. We were very well treated. We had a lovely little moment. Of course, guys, always follow us at Pulp Kitchen Podcast on socials to see the shenanigans we got up to. You had a lovely moment stabbing me to death in slow motion on some sand, which I'm sure they shipped in from Rome itself to be there. We had some lovely cocktails. We witnessed a fight, a staged fight, like 2 guys who clearly just fresh out of drama school in their combat training, fight to the death, and we were given some ceremonial coins to place a wager on who would win, and that was a strange one, if I'm honest, watching those 2 guys beat each other up. One of them, I think, had a capsule of blood which he popped at one point. We're just there like thinking, good God.
The marketing spend and the marketing meetings that would have gone into these events is always interesting. Like the feast table that was at the event, there was a Roman table resplendent with a Roman feast, huge wheels of cheese and blocks of charcuterie, which we were thankfully informed was going to a charity afterwards and not just being thrown in the bin. But it was very Roman in that respect.
It was totally like excessive feast to celebrate the victory of our fallen dead. And I even thought, I don't know why I thought it, I looked at this huge piece of ham and I was like, well, of course this is fake. Went to go pick it up and it was slimy like live produce. So I was like, this is real charcuterie. This is easily £4,000 worth of charcuterie just sitting here. Like that wheel of brie is about £120 worth of cheese.
They also hadn't given us anything to eat it with. So James and I basically grabbed brie out of the... Well, James grabbed the brie. I didn't have brie myself, but just palmed it out. And I could see some people afterwards looking at it going, what animal has come in here and has grabbed some brie? But yes, we saw it in the Cineworld IMAX. So we didn't have the shaky chairs of the 4DX. This is the same screen where we see a lot of multimedia screenings. This is where we saw Dune Part 2, a good solid IMAX screening, I think, which is a good one to go to if you can't go to the BFI one.
So moving on to the film itself, Gladiator 2, we got a lovely little intro from Ridley Scott, who read some notes, and then Paul Mescal, who stood there and said, you know what, I think this is Ridley Scott's finest film, and they walked off and they played the film. And I think Ridley Scott, George, I think of all the directors since we've started doing the show, I think he's had the biggest output of any director. He's done The Last Duel, House of Gucci, Gladiator Part 2, and I feel like he's produced some other things, but yes, of course, and Napoleon. He's just completely unstoppable, but he is back with Gladiator 2, a legacy sequel if there ever was one, 24 years after the original. And I've always thought Gladiator having this really slightly very iconic place on most people's living rooms in their DVD collection. It was a real mainstay of that era, and it was, you know, had a lot of Oscar attention. It was really like the making of Russell Crowe at the time. The way in which they realized the Colosseum was groundbreaking for the time was, you know, very sad to watch and beloved. And I don't think it's a film I've seen since maybe I was in my teens. When was the last time you think you saw Gladiator 1?
Rewatched it Christmas 22, Christmas 21, one of those, and held up. Recent. Solid watch. But that was maybe the second time I'd seen it. I know, especially guys who have watched it like 8 times. It's like a recurrent perennial thing for men.
Of course it is. And so this sequel picks up 16 years after the fall of Marcus Aurelius, who is the emperor who was slain by Joaquin Phoenix's character in the first one. And we pick up with our character played by Paul Mescal called Mano, but we know from the marketing of this film that he is Lucius. He is the boy of Connie Nielsen's character Lucilla in the first Gladiator, who is now grown up. After the Roman Empire invades his town, his wife girlfriend is killed in battle, and he is completely burdened with rage and beset on avenging her. And in the process of being invaded, he winds up with Denzel Washington's Macronus, who in a similar role to the what's the actor's name from the first one? Who is in that very similar role, Oliver Reed's role. He's someone who sort of assesses gladiators in the early exterior stages and buys them up if they have potential. He has sort of a political leaning to hopefully sort of navigate his way through to the high political areas of Rome. And the general in question who killed Lucius's wife is played by Pedro Pascal. He's called Marcus Acacius, who is now with Connie Nielsen's character Lucilla. But Rome is filled with corruption and greed, and it is led by twin emperors, played by Joseph Quinn and Fred Heckinger. And they are bratty and erratic and attention deficit, and they scream and they feast, and they have orgies with food and monkeys hanging off of them. And it's a bit of a disaster in terms of governance. And that's basically the sort of main conceit of the film, and it reveals more onto you as the plot goes on. And I'd say the structure of the first half of this film is incredibly similar territory to the first Gladiator, but that's probably all you need to know for this film. George, how did you get on with Gladiator 2?
Well, there you are. Very well explained. Absolutely. Yeah. 25 years later, we're back. And obviously interspersed with huge action set pieces. If anyone has seen the trailer, we're talking about there's sea battles and Colosseum events. The sad thing is I found Gladiator 2 to be very weak and disappointing. And I'm not even a huge, fanboy of the original or anything like that. But in watching the second one last night, it made me just realize the thing that made Gladiator 1 so great is the story. I think it's almost been misremembered that it wasn't about the Colosseum, or at least it wasn't solely about the Colosseum battles and the spectacle and the chariots and the horses. It was about the story. There is a reason that when you talk about Gladiator to people, the first thing they say is husband to a murdered wife, father to a murdered son, because that connects immediately to the emotional heart of the story. Gladiator is a good story. A high-class general betrayed, of personal betrayal, working his way back up to reclaim his honor. It's a real like universal story. What was so disappointing with this one is that there are individual ingredients of good ideas within the story. There is, a general arc of revenge from Paul Mescal's character. There is a clandestine operation in Rome to try and restore democracy. There are these mad leaders who are losing their grip on power because they are so bloodlust and so maniacal. Those are interesting ideas, but I was just unbelievably surprised at how prosaic and dull and uninterestingly those ideas are executed. And I thought, you've had 24 years. Is this really the best you can think of? And there were a couple of times I just thought in the 24 years since the first one came out, things like Game of Thrones, and actually specifically even House of the Dragon this year, even closely, has superseded Gladiator. And there was a couple of times I was thinking with the most recent season of House of the Dragon with Tom Glencarney's the king role and the sort of the other king characters as well. I've only seen it 3 months ago, but I've forgotten the characters' names already. But that idea of like how to deal with the public, how much blood to give them, how much hope to give them, and I was thinking that's been executed much better, and it was a shame to see that go to waste. There are introductions of things from the previous film, like Derek Jacobi's character. I thought, why is that here? They had not done anything with it. I think a central problem for me as well is the Lucius character. Okay, I've come away thinking, were we meant to have known that? Is there an earlier iteration of this film in which that was meant to be a surprise? Because I just double checked online. That is public knowledge. That is absolutely public knowledge. You Google Gladiator 2, it says Lucius. His name is Lucius. And on the Wikipedia little plot thing, it says, so that is public knowledge. But the way it is delivered in the film, about halfway through, it's like it's some major twist. And I'm thinking, is that, and it's so underwhelming when it arrives, because we're thinking, we know this. We've been told this in the whole marketing. Is that really a big surprise? Either keep that as a surprise or have it come in at the beginning, because one of the other problems is that the characters are really, really thin. Paul Mescal, great actor, not given a lot to do. His character, we are given one scene of him clutching some seeds before the Romans invade, and he's enslaved to be a gladiator. I mean, for goodness sake, and that's a real difference to the first one. I know it's unfair to compare it to the first one, but because it has such a close parallel in its narrative structure, in the first film you really understood. You had time to understand why the betrayal was so bad and what that meant, and the threat that Commodus posed. In this, it's sort of just like a general, my land was conquered. I hate Rome. Generally. I think the best work is probably being done by Denzel Washington. I think that with just to give it some credit, I think it's better than Napoleon. I think it's better than the House of Gucci. I found Ridley's recent work, him to have a real impatience with him with his story, and I got the sense with this he's got the sense with this one that he really actually does like this world and is happy to spend time there, is happy to be back there. But still, and there's a moment, I don't know how we can talk about this outside of sort of spoiler terms, quite early on with some CGI animals in an arena, I'd say about 25 minutes in. And that was a real moment of, what the fuck is happening? The creature design of it felt like something out of Alien. I just thought, what is happening here? So I would just say to round up before I head back to you, James, I would say underwhelming, dull at times, punctuated by quite interesting action, although often strangely edited. Like there are battle scenes that suddenly draw to a close without any sort of sense of a narrative cohesion. And just kind of thin. It's a 2.5 hour film that I have actually found quite forgettable. Not terrible, but I would probably give it like a 2.5 out of 5.
I totally agree. I'm with you basically on everything you said. And I'm quite surprised it's worse than I thought it was going to be. And even in a 2.5 hour runtime, it was immediately clear to me that when that moment happened, when we saw the CGI animals in the first major fight scene, it was this almost like a shock reaction of going, this is this type of film. I actually am really surprised that decision was made. And fighting, whether it's the rhino, which you've seen in the trailer, or that first fight scene with the CG animals, there was such a notable difference for me when they were fighting CG things versus real life people, and the real life sword against sword worked so much better. But you didn't focus on that, and you instead went to do that as your first bit of violence for the film, which I thought was such a mistake, and it left a really sour taste in my mouth from the film going on. There were so many times in this film where the story really let the film down, and I really just wish they had taken a moment to breathe and build some dramatic tension, because you hinted at there were lots of actually interesting dynamics with characters, like you said, a secondary plot. There are moments that happens to characters which I didn't expect. There are added elements to some characters which are just underexplored. And I'm like, you've got ingredients there. Please just take some time to explain why this matters to your characters. And I think about the first Gladiator, the whole build up to Maximus being betrayed, being led into the woods to be killed, is a really big moment, and him rising back is what makes the film such an entertaining watch. And then similarly, a Commonus in the first one is really nasty and villainous, and he's really unlikable, and he does really horrible things, and he's threatening. I understand how he navigates politics and is immediately threatening to our characters. Whereas these two emperors, although I think they're having a lot of fun being sort of those young, arrogant emperors, they never really posed a threat to me at all. I never felt a sense of danger from them. And I think the film really lacked a core sense of an antagonist. Denzel, bless him, is one of the great actors who even he can pull some interesting parts out of a really terrible script. But the dialogue immediately screams out to me as being really poor. It's surprisingly much worse than I thought. I agree with you. It's probably a little bit better than House of Gucci and Napoleon, but I don't see. I've seen a lot of people saying this is Ridley Scott's best work since X and Y, and I don't really think it's worth putting it on that in that conversation of of best work since. I felt like we got to the last half an hour and it was trying to set up another film, which sort of totally took away from any impact this was going to have. I agree. I think Paul Mescal is a really interesting actor, but it's just not really given anything interesting to do here. Surprisingly dull. And to some of the mistakes, I hope people, when they watch it, believe us. You'll immediately see that thing and just go, "Oh, what happened here? That feels like CG from 2007." And this film had budget. We had charcuterie. Like, they had money to spend on on CG animals there. So yeah, just very surprising.
Yeah, I agree. I think what it misunderstands is that the first film was actually quite a good, again, a great story. A Gladiator film's only as good as its story, but like a great sort of political drama of the shifting balance of power that then expressed itself very well in great action scene moments. There aren't actually that many arena scenes in the first one. They are sort of carefully plotted throughout the script, whereas it's almost like the inverse with this. It's like, we have great arena set pieces. How do we string that together with some sort of underbaked plot? I think also a key example of how the plot's underbaked is about, in the first one, not only do you care about the portrayal of Maximus on a personal level, you also care about Rome. You also care about the people of Rome, that they've missed out. They're getting a dictatorship when they were promised with Marcus Aurelius this vision of the future, and you really care. And in this film, people are saying, "Oh, I missed the dream of Rome," and I thought, I couldn't give a monkeys, no pun intended, with the animals in this film. But like, I think that's I felt no sense of connection to that. And with the emperors as well, yeah, I agree. Like, they're having a good time, and when you say there's no sense of threat, it's because they are, in a way, they are not contextualized at all. What I find strange is that the first one was all about the who inherits the crown, or who inherits the role to be emperor. So with these two twins, I'm like, well, who are they? Who are their parents? Why have they come to be twins? It's only 15, 16 years after the first one. So how are we meant to have that? How we arrived at this point? Anyway,
It's also like releasing as a legacy sequel, being 24, 25 years later. It's like, as you said before, time has passed, and we've had so much great drama. As you said, Game of Thrones obviously screams out for how to do really great dialogue and knotty political dramas. Like, I just thought, 6-7 months ago, we watched Dune Part 2 in that same theater, and that film has basically a Gladiator scene, which, even though Dune Part 2 story-wise isn't as knotty or as complex as some of the things we referenced earlier, I think Denis Villeneuve completely outdid Ridley Scott here in terms of spectacle and stakes and threat. And I just think, like, the things have changed, and because you've taken so long to make the sequel, if it was going to be relevant, you should have released it before 2009. You've revealed that this actually, you haven't, but by taking so long, that you haven't got anything new to say, and it is essentially just going into the IP drawer and finding something to remake or sort of make a sequel to. And yeah, it's a bit of I'm actually quite surprised, because we said quite a lot. We were with some other friends in the premiere, and we were like, "What do you think? Do you think it's gonna be any good?" And I was kind of saying, like, "Look, I'm kind of like cautiously optimistic. I don't think it's gonna have the same impact as Gladiator 1, but I hope I have fun." And I just sort of leaving the cinema, I was like, "Oh, it's not even close to my aspiration of what I thought it could be."
Yeah, I said to James, like, put it this way, we've seen many films in that screening room, and Dune Part 2 was one of them, and that's a 3-hour movie that was completely enraptured by, like, one of the best cinema experiences I've ever had. Last night, seeing that film in that screening room, I realized how uncomfortable those chairs are, and I was shifting, and I was fidgeting, and I blame the film for that entirely. Like, it made me realize I was just there, like,
they were the same seats.
Same seats, same room, but completely different film. It's a real shame. And I will say that, like, I do believe when I'm watching the scenes and you've got, 100 extras and horses and things running by, I have no doubt that Ridley Scott is a master of his craft at being able to corral and run a set like that. And I believe that if you are someone like Paul Mescal on a set like that, watching the master at work, it must be incredible. And it's probably a reason why we don't get many films like that anymore, because Ridley Scott is drawing on a heritage and a history in film and an experience in film that later subsequent filmmakers don't have. But that said, it is sadly very, very underwhelming, and just It is, isn't it? It's just there. It's just on screen.
And painfully similar to the first one in the first half. The structure of it is like a sort of rushed version of the first Gladiator, but not in a way that's compelling or like it's upping the pace for a modern audience. Like the build up to the first fight scene in Gladiator is brilliant because he's walking underneath as the crowd are drumming and there's blood being poured on them and they wait in the tunnels and the guy pees himself and there's this real sense of terror that they're going to die. And same thing happens again when he fights in the Colosseum for the first time and it reveals the crowd. I'm like, it's been 25 years. Like, show me that moment again. Like, build up to the tension. Like, that's what I was looking forward to with all the new bells and whistles and that sense of scale. And I'm like, he didn't even do that.
Yeah, I think it's disappointing. Sorry, I've just forgotten my point.
Oh, sorry. It was interesting. While you think of your point, I messaged some friends who had seen I'd been there, and they were like, "How was Gladiator 2?" And I said, "Guys, I actually thought it was really poor, terrible dialogue, very messy plot, really disappointing." And they were like, "Oh, I spent £25 on tickets to go see it for this weekend. I'm absolutely gutted." And I was like, "I'm so sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but I bet a lot of people are because it's got such a big marketing splash. People will have booked big IMAX seats to go and see this because they love the original." And I think there's going to be a bit of a awkward reaction when people leave.
I agree. Yeah, a little bit of a backlash, really, a little bit of a like a empty calories feeling. I've just remembered what I was going to say. It was the going back to what we liked about the first film and what this one lacks, that emotional connection. A great example is the "Now We Are Free," the Hans Zimmer, the score, that iconic thing that when you hear it, because they're playing it a lot, obviously, in the build-up to us going into the screening room, it gives you like a shiver down your spine. It gives you goosebumps. It's a really powerful thing. And you can all think of the ending of Gladiator with the son running down the field and they're in the Elysian fields and he's running his hand down, like, oh, great. I really get you. You will not be moved by this at all. There is not a single ounce of emotion in this film. It tries, but it's completely generic.
I also felt like in the last sort of 30, 40 minutes of the film, I wasn't clear in my head what some of our main characters' intentions were. I no longer really understood exactly what they wanted in that moment because the story just hadn't been that clear. And there's like Denzel's character has a sort of, he's got another side to him, which is alluded at. But even still, I'm like, what are we trying to do again? And whose side are you on when there's two armies facing each other? I'm like, I don't actually know where you'd stand right now. I'm just sort of letting things play out until this ends.
And also the Hound from Game of Thrones, just there. Just somebody turns up and you're like, oh, he gets like 3 lines and you're like, oh, okay. But anyway, so there you go, guys. That was, Gladiator 2. Those are our thoughts. It's a bit of an initial reaction. We only saw it yesterday, but send us your thoughts to hello@pulpkitchenpodcast.com. We'll definitely be stewing over it over the coming few weeks. And I'm sure lots of people are going to get to see it and have their thoughts over it. I'll be interested to see. I'm sure it'll make a lot of money. I think it will do. But then who knows anymore? We're in a post Joker 2 world. Let us know your thoughts.
I wonder if it's going to have a very good opening 5 days where everyone who is sold by the marketing have already booked tickets and it's going to have this like chock-a-block schedule. But I wonder if it's going to have what they would have hoped, right, is that for the weeks going by it's still getting tickets of people going to see it. But I think there's going to be a bit of a drop-off if people come out of the cinema and say it's boring and it's not that interesting.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. And also, sorry, I know we've rehashed this, but yeah, I never felt tense in a sense. I never felt like, oh my God, the fate of my characters are really in peril. I thought, oh, it's an interesting set piece that also, by the way, completely over-marketed this film. I know it's one of the biggest films of the year and they're absolutely pushing it, but just to sort of remind myself for the chat, I rewatched the trailer and I was like, Christ, this shows everything, absolutely everything. There's not a set piece that isn't revealed in any of the marketing, I'm afraid.
Yeah, what did you make of the sharks in the water in the Colosseum? As soon as it cut to sharks swimming, I did roll my eyes and shifted my seat and think, you kind of lost a sense of being a bit grounded here. It doesn't look like it makes any sense.
I agree. I mean, historically, you don't give a two, whatever. It's filmmakers, whatever. But you're right. Watching a CGI shark that's the CGI equivalent, sort of like you might find on like Sharknado or something. I'm sorry, I don't be harsh, but it doesn't look like a great shark. But yeah, we've come a long way from like the first one where you're really scared for these characters as they get encircled in the Colosseum, and Maximus, because he's a general, says, no, listen to me. get 4-minute formation, listen to me, and if you don't do that, you'll die. And like Paul Mescal's character does that in this, and we're like, but why? I understand why Maximus does, because he was a general. We see him at the beginning of the film winning a massive battle through his great strategy. But in this, it's just like Paul Mescal's just a bit
He's
strong.
just some guy.
He's just some guy.
He's just some guy with no context for him, or why he cares to like organize other gladiators. Like you don't really have much of a bond with them. We're kind of sort of going on and on about this, but you can tell it's very thin and shallow.
Just to wrap this up, it got me thinking about legacy sequels though, and or at least belated sequels. And in terms of belated sequels, if you want to see something that's about, a child being taken away from their family and plotting revenge and going back to, scorn revenge across the sands, absolutely watch Furiosa instead. I think that offers so much more this year. And that film flopped, and that's a real shame. If you compare like the dramatic tension, the stakes that it introduced at the beginning of Furiosa, like I was really there, completely locked in. So different from Gladiator 2. And I was also thinking just about, it's a film that we've got a sequel to 25, 24 years later. And I was like, do you know what? I think I had a better time with Beetlejuice, which is another sequel that came too late.
Yeah.
It's not a perfect film. I chuckled a few times, and I was trying to work out if I had more fun with Twisters. Now, Twister 1 isn't a great movie, so it's got less of a bar to clear.
I had more fun with Twisters. I'll say that.
I think I had more fun. They're both mid. Twisters, don't get me wrong, is a very mid film, but like I think I still got more out of that than I did.
You're totally right on Furiosa there as a take. Like that film it really had something to say. It had a world it really wanted to flesh out. It structurally was not the same to Mad Max Fury Road. It was like purposefully structurally so different, and it offered people who love that universe something really interesting, characters that were interesting. It's just what a shame if Gladiator 2 ends up being the success story financially from the releases. But I think unless you have anything else to say there, George, I think we'll probably hand back to past James and George in the studio. I know you already said it, but as always, guys, we would genuinely really like to hear what you think. If you did enjoy the film, maybe you got something out of it that we didn't. Please, as always, send in your thoughts to hello@pulpkitchenpodcast.com. We'll definitely be reading out your guys' responses in the coming weeks, so make sure you send them in. As for now, take care. Bye. Back to the studio.